Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Newsnight on DD India, your primetime destination for news and bespoke analysis. It's good to see you again. Right, on the show tonight, they came, they saw, but did they concur? That's the question the world seems to be asking after US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping held a virtual summit, their first such meeting after Biden was elected president of the US. We'll get you more on that. Also on the show, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates a 340-kilometer-long Purvanchal Expressway, witnesses an air show on a 3.2-kilometer airstrip built on the expressway in the Sultanpur district of Uttar Pradesh. He says security is as important as prosperity, which is why the expressway was built in such a manner that fighter aircraft could land and take off from the expressway. Plus, news and updates from India and the world, all that and much more coming up over the next 1 hour. But first, as always, the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates the 341-kilometer-long Purvanchal Expressway, which will connect eastern Uttar Pradesh to the state capital Lucknow. Says expressway is a pride and wonder of Uttar Pradesh, adds that it is a proof of accomplishment of resolutions in the state. Prime Minister Modi slams previous governments of Uttar Pradesh, says they did not pay attention to the overall development of the state, but now a new chapter of development is being written. Criticizes dynastic politics, says only the interest of a few families was being served by those governments. The Mirage 2000, Jaguar and Sukhoi fighter jets display the might of the Indian Air Force by landing and taking off from the Purvanchal Expressway. An AN-32 transport aircraft lands with Special Forces commandos. Prime Minister Modi himself landed in a C-130J Hercules transport aircraft. Prime Minister Modi addresses an event marking the celebration of the first audit day, says the mindset of CAG versus government has changed. Today, audit is being considered as an important part of value addition. Lauds the CNAG for putting the truth of previous governments in front of the country. India decides to resume operations of the Sri Kartarpur Corridor from 17th November, keeping in view improved COVID-19 situation. Decision to benefit a large number of Sikh pilgrims. Sri Kartarpur Sahib is a place of worship and devotion for millions of Indians. US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping hold a virtual summit. The US opposes China's unilateral attempts to change the status quo in Taiwan. Xi says the two sides must increase communication and cooperation to solve common challenges. US Special Envoy for Afghanistan Thomas West visits New Delhi, calls on National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and holds talks with Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, exchanges views on recent developments and issues of common interest in Afghanistan. And the International Cricket Council announces the schedule of events for the coming decade. There will be 8 new ICC tournaments, of which India will host 3. Right, first up, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday inaugurated a multi-lane Purvanchal Expressway. The 341-kilometer-long expressway will reduce travel time between Lucknow and Ghazipur to 3.5 hours from 6 hours. It has a capacity to be expanded to 8 lanes in the future and will give a boost to connectivity and employment opportunities in the region. The Prime Minister slammed previous governments in Uttar Pradesh for reducing the eastern region of the state to just corruption and poverty. More in the next report.
यूपी विकास का एक्सप्रेसवे है। ये एक्सप्रेसवे यूपी की प्रगति का एक्सप्रेसवे है। ये एक्सप्रेसवे नए यूपी के निर्माण का एक्सप्रेसवे है। ये एक्सप्रेसवे यूपी में संकल्पों की सिद्धि का जीता जागता प्रमाण है। ये यूपी की शान है। ये यूपी का कमाल है।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the 341-kilometer-long Purvanchal Expressway that will reduce the travel time between Lucknow to Ghazipur to 3.5 hours from 6 hours. The expressway begins from Chandsarai village in Lucknow and ends at Haidaria village located on National Highway 31 in Ghazipur, which is 18 km from the UP-Bihar border. It will have 7 major bridges, 7 railway overbridges, 114 minor bridges and 271 underpasses. The 6-lane expressway has the capacity to be expanded to 8 lanes in the future. Not only will it boost connectivity, but will also open up employment opportunities in the region.
पूर्वांचल एक्सप्रेसवे के इर्द-गिर्द बहुत जल्द नए उद्योग लगने शुरू हो जाएंगे। इसके लिए 21 जगहों को भी चिन्हित भी किया जा चुका है। आने वाले दिनों में इन एक्सप्रेसवे किनारे जो शहर बसे हैं, उन शहरों में फूड प्रोसेसिंग, दूध से जुड़े उत्पाद, कोल्ड स्टोरेज, भंडारण, इनसे जुड़ी गतिविधियां तेजी से बढ़ने वाली है।
With Uttar Pradesh heading for polls in March 2022, PM Narendra Modi launched a blistering attack on opposition parties, accusing them of putting family first. He said the previous governments in Uttar Pradesh reduced the state's vital eastern part to mafiawad and poverty, but the BJP government is now writing a new chapter of development.
यूपी के लोगों के साथ नाइंसाफी की जिस तरह उन सरकारों ने विकास में भेदभाव किया, जिस तरह सिर्फ अपने परिवार का हित साधा, यूपी के लोग ऐसा करने वालों को हमेशा हमेशा के लिए यूपी के विकास के रास्ते से हटा देंगे।
He said that the family first approach was not restricted to Lucknow but can be seen in Delhi as well.
ये भी दुर्भाग्य रहा कि दिल्ली और लखनऊ दोनों ही स्थानों पर, चाहे लखनऊ हो या दिल्ली, दोनों ही स्थानों पर परिवारवादियों का ही दबदबा रहा। सालों साल तक परिवारवादियों की यही पार्टनरशिप यूपी की आकांक्षाओं को कुचलती रही, बर्बाद करती रही।
The Purvanchal Expressway, which was completed at a cost of nearly 22,000 crore rupees, will bring in investment worth billions in the coming times. It will not only connect 9 districts of the state, but will also make it easier to reach cities with huge potential for development. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, the Purvanchal Expressway reflects the capability and resolve of Uttar Pradesh. With Ajay Vikram Singh in Sultanpur, Bureau Report, DD India.
Now, Prime Minister Modi touched down on an Indian Air Force C-130J Hercules transport aircraft on the 3.2-kilometer-long emergency airstrip on the Purvanchal Expressway to mark its inauguration. The Prime Minister witnessed a magnificent air show with fighter and transport aircraft making multiple landings and takeoffs from this emergency airstrip. The Sukhoi 30 and Surya Karan team of fighter jets displayed majestic maneuvers. Take a look.
Indian Air Force's C-130J Hercules transport aircraft touching down on the Purvanchal Expressway. It taxied down the 340-kilometer long 6-lane expressway with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on board the aircraft. This 3.2-kilometer long airstrip on the expressway will enable landing and takeoff of Indian Air Force fighter planes in case of emergency. The touchdown on the expressway turned tarmac marked the momentous inauguration of the expressway. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had laid the foundation stone for the Purvanchal Expressway in 2018. Prime Minister also witnessed a magnificent air show with fighter and transport aircrafts making multiple takeoffs and landings at the emergency airstrip. Mirage 2000 was the first to touch down.
Mirage 2000.
It made a pit stop for a mock drill in refueling and emergency servicing. Next was a Russian-made twin-engine AN-32 transport aircraft.
आप देखेंगे AN-32 के पीछे का रैंप खुलेगा और
On board were guard commandos and snipers who executed a cordon-off exercise. All eyes were skyward with the Mirage 2000 zooming down on the expressway tarmac.
ये था Mirage 2000.
Flying at a speed of 350 kilometers per hour, the Jaguar ground attack aircraft that has been modernized by the Indian Air Force also touched down as the Prime Minister looked on. Next were the Sukhoi 30 fighter jets that performed mesmerizing air acrobatics.
Out a series of rolls as it fly past you.
The Sukhoi 30s in tandem with Surya Kiran, the Indian Air Force's acrobatic display team, also put on a colourful show to remember.
आकाश में Sukhoi 30 जहाज Sukhoi 30 में आज उड़ान भर रहे हैं जांबाज pilots wing commander Chahal और flight lieutenant Jerry.
The culmination was marked by the C-130J taxiing in. To fly out the Prime Minister to home base. With Ashwini Mishra, Bureau Report, DD India.
Right, time now for a short discussion on this magnificent display of Indian Air Force's might as well as development of the inauguration of the expressway. Joining me is Prafulla Ketkar, editor of the Organizer Weekly. Mr. Ketkar, welcome to Newsnight. Now, the Prime Minister alluded to, it's a study in contrast. The Prime Minister said it was family first then, and now it is development first. I'll come to dynastic politics in just a bit. Let's keep a focus on development, as the Prime Minister himself said. Now, this is one development which is visible, tangible. It's not just on paper. It is there for all to see. It was built in record time in spite of the pandemic. And it calls for, regional and even development of the state of Uttar Pradesh.
Absolutely. Ramesh, see, there are three important aspects to this. One is when this government came to power, Prime Minister made an emphatic statement about the development of eastern regions of India.
Right.
And it was when he chose Varanasi as his constituency, then also he made it a point that, if the development is even, then all over growth of India can be doubled,
right,
simply because this unevenness leads to migration, leads to underdevelopment on one side and concentration on other. So there is a pressure on resources. So this is one. Secondly, this is a infrastructural marvel in many ways, because this is 341-kilometer patch now that connects virtually Delhi to almost Bihar border.
Right.
So the first patch which goes from Delhi to Agra, then Agra to Lucknow, and now this Purvanchal Expressway from Lucknow to Ghazipur. So this shows, because when these roads and highways are built, it is not just the roads, it is the stories of the villages that make transformation around these highways. That also is important. Besides that, the statement that Prime Minister made today, that the development concerns and security concerns should go hand in hand. This airstrip is clearly an example of this. In September, we have seen Defense Minister Rajnath Singh did the similar kind of thing in Rajasthan. Now UP, as Prime Minister said, having two such facilities. So in any emergency kind of landing, now just for the understanding of the viewers, we need to understand the magnitude of this particular patch, because there are 18 flyovers, 7 railway overbridges, 7 long bridges, 104 minor bridges, 13 interchanges, 271 underpass, and it connects to almost 9 districts of Uttar Pradesh. Now, if this is the thing, then it clearly says, and for me, there is, Ramesh, a very important political message also. Because UP is going in the election mode,
right.
And from the opposition side, especially Mr. Akhilesh Yadav has been making a statement again and again that most of the projects that are being completed were inaugurated by me. This government hasn't started anything new. Here, subtly but very emphatically, Prime Minister has made a point that I had inaugurated this in 2018, and in record time we have completed this 22,000 worth project. So this carrier of development for Purvanchal region, I think itself is a big political narrative. So it is not just the economics, it is not just the security, but it is also can prove to be good politics for the ruling BJP.
So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is this will have, it's not just about a road or a highway. It has a domino effect, a cascading effect. It'll give, raise more jobs, improve connectivity, build infrastructure development, and also the ancillary industries around this part of the 9 districts of the eastern UP as well. So this is a win-win proposition on any metric.
Absolutely. See, just you take one metric from Lucknow to Ghazipur. The earlier time was minimum 6 hours.
Right.
Now it has reduced to 3.5 hours. That clearly shows this connectivity is going to improve. Now it is not just about connecting 2 places. In between, when you are connecting 9 districts,
right,
and the villages and their because government, especially the UP government, is focusing on this aspect related to clusters.
Right.
The industry specifically related to those districts, the industrial corridor that is being developed by Uttar Pradesh Expressways Industrial Development Authority in this particular region, and the connectivity for these products to reach to the major destinations for the export purpose. All these things are going to change. So these expressways, right from Delhi to Agra, Agra to Lucknow, and now Lucknow to Ghazipur, is virtually going to connect entire UP with expressways from Delhi to Bihar border, and therefore from both the sides of UP, that is north and south, the development opportunities, the employability aspects, the connectivity aspects are going to be much more viable. The opportunities are going to, and that's why this carrier of development narrative is very, very important for the entire Purvanchal region.
Indeed, as the Prime Minister himself said, it is development first for me, but for some other parties in previous governments, it was always family first. And as Mr. Ketkar mentioned, this is indeed good politics. On that note, may I thank my guest, Prafulla Ketkar, for joining us here on DD India. Appreciate it. Now, moving on the occasion of India's first maiden audit day, which marks the historic origin of the institution of the Comptroller and Auditor General, Prime Minister Modi called for recognizing and celebrating the contributions of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi. He highlighted the importance of the CAG. He said the government along with the CAG have redefined the approach and offer an expert view to introduce systematic improvements for the government. He called for minimum government and maximum governance, which will give a boost to public institutions.
साथियों, एक समय था जब देश में ऑडिट को एक आशंका, एक भय के साथ देखा जाता था। सीएजी बनाम सरकार, लेकिन आज इस मानसिकता को बदला गया है। आज ऑडिट को वैल्यू एडिशन का अहम हिस्सा माना जा रहा है। सरकार के कामकाज का आकलन करते समय सीएजी के पास आउटसाइडर व्यू पॉइंट का एडवांटेज होता है। सरकार सर्वम, सरकार जानम, सरकार ज्ञानम, इस पुरानी सोच को हमने बदलने का तय कर। मिनिमम गवर्नमेंट मैक्सिमम गवर्नेंस के इस अभियान में हमारी हर संवैधानिक संस्था के लिए ये अमृत काल का एक संकल्प 2047 में जब हिंदुस्तान शताब्दी मनाएगा, तब देश को बहुत ऊंचाई पर ले जाने की ताकत के रूप में काम आएगा। शुचिता और पारदर्शिता हमारे व्यक्तिगत जीवन में हो या सरकार में, ये हमारे लिए सबसे बड़े मोरल बूस्टर होते हैं। पहले देश के बैंकिंग सेक्टर में ट्रांसपेरेंसी की कमी के चलते बैंकों के एनपीएस बढ़ते गए। जितनी स्ट्रांग और जितनी साइंटिफिक हमारी ऑडिटिंग होगी, उतनी ही हमारी व्यवस्थाएं ट्रांसपेरेंट और मजबूत होगी। आज आप एडवांस एनालिटिक टूल्स इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, जियो स्पेशियल डेटा और सैटेलाइट इमेजरी का इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं। ये इनोवेशन हमारे संसाधनों भी उसमें भी होना चाहिए और हमारी कार्यशैली में भी होना चाहिए। इन फ्यूचर डेटा विल बी डिक्टेटिंग द हिस्ट्री। आज आजादी के अमृत महोत्सव में देश जो प्रयास कर रहा है, जिन लक्ष्यों को लेकर आगे बढ़ रहा है, भविष्य में जब देश के इन प्रयासों का, इस कालखंड का आकलन किया जाएगा, तो आपका काम, आपके दस्तावेज उसका एक प्रामाणिक आधार बनेंगे। गांधी जी हो, सरदार पटेल हो या फिर बाबा साहब आम्बेडकर, राष्ट्र निर्माण में इन सभी का योगदान सीएजी के लिए, हम सभी के लिए, कोटि कोटि देशवासियों के लिए बहुत बड़ी प्रेरणा है। देश के लिए कैसे बड़े लक्ष्य तय किए जाते हैं, कैसे उन्हें हासिल किया जाता है, कैसे व्यवस्था में परिवर्तन लाया जाता है, इन महान व्यक्तित्वों की जीवन गाथा हमें बहुत कुछ सिखाती है।
Right, let me now dive into our cover story. US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping traded strong warnings on the future of Taiwan at a virtual summit meant to establish what Biden calls common sense guardrails against a conflict between their countries. Now, the maiden Xi-Biden summit lasted longer than expected, 3.5 hours to be precise. Now, while the goal was to settle an increasingly volatile relationship between the economic and geopolitical competitors, tension over Taiwan loomed large over the talks. Chinese state media reported after the summit that Xi cautioned Biden that encouraging Taiwanese independence would be, quote-unquote, playing with fire. The White House readout after the summit was more measured, but reading between the lines, Biden's pushback against Beijing's aggressive posture toward Taiwan was evident.
US President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Tuesday Asia time completed their longest exchange as world leaders, but 3.5 hours of talks appear to have done little, if anything, to narrow divergent positions between the superpowers. US President Joe Biden pressed his Chinese counterpart on Beijing's human rights practices in an over 3-hour call on Monday, while Xi Jinping warned that China would respond to provocations on Taiwan. The closely watched conversation between the leaders of the world's biggest economies was described by both sides as frank and direct, as the two sides tried to lower the temperature and avoid conflict. Though the talks appeared to yield no immediate outcomes, they did give the two leaders opportunity to nudge their relations away from icy confrontation. They discussed North Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, global energy markets, trade and competition, climate, military issues, the pandemic, and other areas where they frequently disagree. There was nothing from the respective readouts to immediately suggest that either side had softened increasingly entrenched positions that had brought relations between the world's two largest economies to a historically volatile point, particularly over the issue of Taiwan. Sharp differences over Taiwan remain. Xi said those in Taiwan who seek independence and their supporters in the United States are playing with fire, according to Xinhua. According to the White House press release, on Taiwan, President Biden underscored that the United States remains committed to the One China policy, guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances that the United States strongly opposes unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. President Biden underscored that the United States will continue to stand up for its interests and values, and together with its allies and partners, ensure the rules of the road for the 21st century, advance an international system that is free, open and fair. Xi, who has not left his country since COVID-19 spread worldwide nearly 2 years ago, compared the two countries to 2 giant ships sailing in the sea that needed to be steadied so they didn't collide.
A sound and steady China-US relationship is required for advancing our two countries' respective development and for safeguarding a peaceful and a stable international environment, including finding effective responses to global challenges such as climate change, which you referenced, and the COVID pandemic. China and the United States should respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation.
Biden spoke of avoiding conflict as well.
It seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition.
China is lagging in a commitment to buy $200 billion more in US goods and services, but Chinese officials said Xi told Biden that it was important to avoid politicizing the issue. Analysts agree that the talks themselves reflect a positive change and that more talks could follow. Bureau Report, DD India.
Right, time now for our In Focus segment, in which we are discussing about Biden-Xi meet amid deepening US-China divide. And joining me are 2 guests, former Indian Ambassador Manjeet Puri and senior journalist Atul Aneja. Gentlemen, welcome to DD India. Ambassador Puri, if I can start with you. Thus, in hindsight, when you look back at this summit, does it bode well for the world at large, or you think tensions persist? In other words, did Xi and Biden agree to disagree, or did you discern somewhat of a forward movement?
Ramesh, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be
Welcome.
on the same platform as Atul Aneja, a very formidable correspondent who's lived in Beijing. I know him from his days in Bahrain. But let me make this point to you, and let me quote your correspondent, who said that analysts believe that the mood is positive. Look, let's be clear, there are issues and there are divides. And some of the divides are sharp, as you mentioned, the issue of Taiwan. But let's also look, just last week, China and the United States shook hands at the climate talks. So, you know, what is being seen is President Biden wanting to reach out. Let me make this point quite clear.
Sure.
Biden belongs to that school which likes the idea of even having in-person meetings. Does not think that these virtual meetings are great. He likes the idea of looking people, as he says, India. Now, for Xi Jinping, this is a great opportunity to meet President Biden, as they say, streamed into the White House. Point I'd like to make is, you can't expect that in one meeting, they'll shake hands and say all the problems of the world are solved. They are not solved. But the way these talks have gone tends to give the message that divisions will remain, competition will remain, contestation will remain, but the two are in contact and talking to each other. And as and when they can find some kind of via vivendi, they will try and come together, which was done in the case of climate change.
Fair enough. Mr. Aneja, as Ambassador Puri was mentioning, contestations might continue. I am tempted to quote Antony Blinken to you before I come to the question I want to pose you. He said, it's a memorable formulation. He says, competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. How would you define this Xi Jinping-Joe Biden summit? Is it going to be cooperative in the near term or more adversarial?
You know, Ramesh, when I was a student in JNU studying international relations, we had this definition of Detant. And there was a scholar called Shishir Gupta who described it very well. He said, restrained rivalry and limited cooperation. And that summed up the Detant phase. I think we are getting into somewhat of a similar phase between China and the United States. Just to give a little bit of a perspective to this, Ramesh, at a time when Trump was around, you see the whole rhetoric coming from the White House was very clear. It was for regime change because the attack was on the Communist Party of China. Because if you recall the speeches which Pompeo made, the former Secretary of State, were targeting the party. And that was something similar to what the Americans did with the Soviet Union. I mean, at that time, it was a target for the CPSU, as a Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Biden already moved the pieces very dramatically because his messaging was not regime change, not CPC targeting, but rather an accommodation with China, which would be on terms which are advantageous to the United States.
Right.
So it was more of a question of positively managing the relationship right from the word go, despite all that happened in the South China Sea, etc., the rhetoric which followed. But fundamentally, it was to find a right balance to manage the relationship. Now, several months have passed. I think the first step towards managing a relationship, though it's so, has begun today. And I agree with Manjeev that, you know, you already made a certain kind of a progress in this management. And now you're trying to look at specific issues where you can possibly work forward. And Taiwan being one of them, because you see the reiteration on the one China policy. Now that's something which Biden has said. What does it essentially mean? Is it an acceptance of that Taiwan cannot be an independent state, just as Xinjiang and Tibet cannot be independent states? So one China principle has been agreed, which is a very major advantage actually to the Chinese. It's a big concession which has been given to the Chinese from that end. So that lays a basis once you're on the one China formulation. Then comes the other issue. Another issue another formulation which came, this is a Chinese statement which I read before the show. Xi Jinping mentioning acceptance of two divergent political systems. You see, when I was in China, the whole game if you talk to the Americans was that we finally want China to become a democracy. You see, that was something which the Chinese were getting riled. They would say that we have a different political system, let's coexist with that.
Right.
That formulation seems to be coming, though I have to add a caveat, this is the Chinese statement. I have not seen whether the White House endorses it. So that's something we need to look into the finer print. Third thing which the Chinese are saying is, mutual respect. Now, this is a very important formulation again. The Chinese say that we want to be treated with you like equals. So you talk to us as equals, though we have differences, but we are to treat each other as equals.
Right.
Now, if you get these three, then you get a framework of what Manjeev was saying, of taking it forward and then getting into the detailing. I think that broad contours have been defined today. And there's a spirit of positivity. How long it lasts, we don't know. But it's I think a positive starting point as far as the China-US relationship. It's another matter whether it's good for India or not good for India. We're not getting into that.
Fair enough.
But for the world, I think overall, if you look at the international peace and security, I think it's a positive development.
And I want to pick on exactly that point that Mr. Aneja was mentioning, Ambassador Puri. He says the chapter of managing their differences has begun with this summit. Now, I'm wondering what's in it for India? How should India read it?
Ramesh, that is the billion-dollar question, isn't it, from our perspective? Now, you have on this panel somebody like Atul Aneja, who's telling you the way things were in China and the way things really haven't changed in that sense of the term. Now, look, I think we need to look at this, in my perspective, from two different angles.
Okay.
One is this entire business of our border issues, and this is a very serious issue.
True.
Let's be very clear on one thing. The Chinese are playing a big global game, and it's possible that what Mr. Biden is doing is, in a sense, let me say, formalizing a G2, perhaps an informal one to start. Yeah, and this has issues as far as the world is concerned. It has serious issues as far as we are concerned. I think we should be clear.
Okay.
So this is this border issue. Then is the issue of the big wide world.
Right.
Look, if there is contestation between China and the United States, and this results in disruptions which can have a major impact on the world economy. Some in India would say, we have an opportunity to take advantage. But many others would say, if it disrupts the way the global economy is moving, it is not going to be to India's advantage. Now, I firmly believe in the latter. And I believe that India is at a time when, let me quote this, the old Chinese proverb, bide your time, is the best one. We are poised. Let me make this point. I make it very often, but nobody else sort of, pays attention to it. We are going to become the largest country in the world in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We will also be the third largest economy in the world. Please just think about what this means in terms of the situation. Our contestation is serious, very significant, and we can't lose sight of it. But we are players, and we are going to be players which people may like it or not. But the G2 will have to remember that there is this G3 also which is roaming around the place. And for that, I would say that if space gets created for India's growth and economic development, then these particular things are not particularly unhappy auguries. There are challenges as a result of that, but they also allow the United States to exercise a modicum of influence on China. Remember that. People always say, better have him inside the tent than outside the tent.
True. Indeed. And Mr. Aneja, Ambassador Puri's mentioning of the G2 takes me back to 2009 when Barack Obama visited Beijing and there was talk of a G2 and India opposed that vehemently at the time. But I want to ask you, because you have the benefit of reporting from Beijing on China and India relationship. There's a lot of discourse and commentary about the fact that Biden went into these talks riding on the strength or the back of signing a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law. Now, they juxtapose Xi Jinping's BRI with the US's and Biden's B3W, Build Back Better World. But my question to you is this. At the same time, here is Xi Jinping walking into his virtual meeting with Biden, riding on the back of a unprecedented resolution passed by the Communist Party just a few days ago. And come November next year, he might well get a third term in office, another unprecedented development in Chinese history. So is there an asymmetry in the relationship? I mean, can these two gentlemen do business going forward?
Well, in absolute terms, there is still an asymmetry between the United States and China. If you look at it, US is, I think, of $18 trillion to a $19 trillion economy, and China is still a $12 trillion economy. The gap is reducing. Now, the point is, we have to look at the trend line. China is catching up with the US. According to the 19th Party Congress, when Xi Jinping famously came out with his 2 centenary goals,
right?
That is, by 2021, which would mark the 100 years of the formation of the Communist Party of China, China would have eliminated all poverty, extreme poverty. Then came the timeline of 2035, when it aspired to beat the US economy, that is, have a GDP above the United States.
Right.
And then 2049, which is 100 years of the formation of PRC, to be the world's #1, not only economy, but to be the dominant power in all spheres of human endeavor. So those were the timelines and the roadmap which was spelled out by the Chinese. So they're going according to that. But right now, if you look at it objectively, US is still ahead of the Chinese. But the Chinese goal is to go ahead on its own roadmap. And so in terms of trend, I think that asymmetry is going to sort of get reduced as much.
Right.
I mean, you can't underestimate the Chinese will to be focused on its goals. So that remains. The goalposts have been defined. So that's the way forward. I think things are going to take place. Yet at the same time, I would say, and I would agree and take forward Manjeev's argument, that the global system is not just G2. I mean, we have entered a multipolar era. You had a certain 1991 Soviet Union collapse. We had the unipolar world start. That has changed now. The power has diffused. Though China is the emerging power, United States is one. You have the Russians on the other side. The G3, which is talking, India is one, and you have the European Union, and probably Brazil and Latin America. So it is a multipolar world now, and no single country can really dominate. Now, what is there for us? I think we must learn what Vajpayee had said during his time of remaining firm on a strategic autonomy and dealing with all the poles so long as that relationship is advantageous to India's defined national interest. So I think now the time has come for us to engage simultaneously with the United States in areas which are beneficial to us, to deal with China in areas which are beneficial to us, and similarly in Eurasia, deal with the Russians in the Central Asians as well.
Right.
So you don't have to just be on the Indo-Pacific track, you have to open the Eurasian track.
Absolutely.
While India remains at the center of it. I think that's the way forward. And while these talks take place, I think we need to be anchored firmly into our own national interests and play this game, and also rise as one of the major poles of the world. I think that's the way forward. It's a multi-vector diplomacy and economic engagement which is required in the future, in my opinion.
Indeed. I'm running out of time, so let me conclude by asking an unfair question to both my guests. To build on the point Mr. Aneja was making, that the chapter of managing their differences has begun. I want to go back to Blinken's formulation, Ambassador Puri and Mr. Aneja: competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. What do you reckon is going to be the most probable option going forward? Competition, collaboration, or adversarial relationship? Ambassador Puri, you first.
Ramesh, you mentioned 3 things. 2 of them are about the globe being together. Note this. And adversarial is with a 4-letter word, must. Likely that they are working to try and minimize that particular aspect.
Fair enough.
I just want to leave one other little thought with you. And that, in my mind, is also particularly important. We have a multipolar world. But today on your panel, you have 2 people who A, place India first, and B, look at multi-alignment as the way forward for us because of the nature of who we are and where we are going. Thank you for this opportunity.
Indeed. Mr. Aneja, you get the last word. Your thoughts, final comments on the future trajectory of the US-China ties under Xi Jinping and Joe Biden over the next 3 or 4 years?
Adversarial will remain, but short of war. And the rest of it, there will be areas of collaboration which will take place. But it is not going to be, I don't think it's getting into G2. The differences are too deep between the two. But it will not end up in a war. Both countries are mature enough to avoid that.
Fair enough. Point well taken. Let me thank both my guests, Ambassador Manjeev Puri and Mr. Aneja, for joining us on this discussion here on Newsnight. Appreciate it. Right, moving on, in some welcome news for Sikh pilgrims, India has decided to reopen the Kartarpur Sahib corridor from 17th November after a dip in the number of COVID cases in the country. Now, this will benefit a large number of Sikh pilgrims. Kartarpur Sahib is a place of worship and devotion for millions of Indians.
Ahead of Guru Purab, the Modi government has made a big decision to reopen the Kartarpur Corridor. In view of COVID-19 pandemic, this corridor was closed in March 2020. Modi government's decision will come into effect from the 17th of November, that is Wednesday. Union Home Minister Amit Shah in a tweet informed about this decision. In the tweet, he wrote, "In a major decision that will benefit large number of Sikh pilgrims, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has decided to reopen the Kartarpur Sahib corridor from tomorrow, November 17. This decision reflects the immense reverence of Modi government towards Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji and our Sikh community. The nation is all set to celebrate the Prakash Utsav of Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji on the 19th of November, and I'm sure that PM Modi's government's decision to reopen the Kartarpur Sahib corridor will further boost the joy and happiness across the country." Amit Shah took a review meeting with officials to add momentum to the work on reopening of the corridor. Delegations from several states have met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the past few days and called for opening the Kartarpur corridor once again.
ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹਾਂ। ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਵਧਾਈ ਦਿੰਦਾ। ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਾ ਵੀ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਕੋਰੀਡੋਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡੇਰਾ ਬਾਬਾ ਨਾਨਕ ਆ ਉਹ ਖੋਲਣ ਦੀ ਮਨਜ਼ੂਰੀ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਆ। ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਲਹਿਰ ਜਾਗੀ ਆ।
ਜਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਅੱਛਾ ਲੱਗਾ, ਵਧੀਆ ਲੱਗਾ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਲੱਗਾ, ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਕਦਮ ਹੈ।
BJP National President JP Nadda too thanked the Modi government on this decision. Following this decision, former Punjab Chief Minister Captain Amrinder Singh in a tweet thanked Prime Minister Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah. In a tweet, he wrote, "My profound gratitude to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah for the timely opening of the Kartarpur Sahib corridor. It will provide a chance to thousands of devotees to pay obeisance at the holy shrine on the occasion of Guru Purab of Guru Nanak Dev Ji." It is pertinent to note that the Union Cabinet had passed a resolution on November 22, 2018 to celebrate the historic occasion of the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev Ji in a grand and befitting manner throughout the country and across the globe. In a landmark decision, the Union Cabinet had also approved the building and development of the Shri Kartarpur Sahib corridor from Dera Baba Nanak to the international boundary to facilitate pilgrims from India to visit Gurudwara Darbar Sahib Kartarpur round the year. Bureau Report, DD India.
In other news, as part of northern India battled air pollution, the Union government on Tuesday convened an emergency meeting with the governments of Delhi and the states adjoining Delhi. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath called for a permanent solution to pollution in the national capital region. Meanwhile, the BJP trained its guns on the Delhi government. It accused the Arvind Kejriwal government of indulging in politics on a sensitive issue.
These North Indian cities enveloped in a blanket of pollution, with the health of the residents at stake. Be it the common man or the elite, no one is safe from all ill effects of thick blanket of smog that seem to be swallowing all the fresh air from the environs. And that is the precise reason that the country's Supreme Court has taken a tough stance with regard to rising pollution. On the directions of the Supreme Court, the centre called an emergency meeting between Delhi and its neighbouring states on Tuesday. The virtual meeting was attended by Commission of Air Quality Management, Chief Secretary of NCR States and Punjab's Chief Secretary. On the basis of the results of the meeting, the centre will present before the Supreme Court a roadmap to deal with rising pollution on Wednesday, when the matter will be heard by the apex court. BJP cornered the state government on pollution in Delhi and accused the Kejriwal government of indulging in politics on this sensitive issue.
देखिए, प्रदूषण का मसला जो है बहुत गंभीर मसला है। इसमें सबको मिलकर काम करने की आवश्यकता है। इसमें किसी प्रकार की राजनीति नहीं होनी चाहिए। अरविंद केजरीवाल प्रदूषण जैसे मसले पर भी वही कर रहे हैं जो वो हमेशा करते हैं। राजनीति कर रहे हैं, विज्ञापन की राजनीति कर रहे हैं, और कल सुप्रीम कोर्ट में वो रंगे हाथ पकड़े भी गए हैं। सुप्रीम कोर्ट में खुद चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया ने उनसे कहा कि क्या हम ऑडिट कराएं कि कितना आप खर्चा प्रदूषण पे कर रहे हैं और कितना खर्चा आप विज्ञापन पे कर रहे हैं। आज कुछ प्रश्न भारतीय जनता पार्टी अरविंद केजरीवाल जी से पूछना चाहती है। क्या ये हकीकत नहीं है? आरटीआई के माध्यम से ये उत्तर मिला है कि लगभग 40,000 रुपीज़, 40,000 रुपये मात्र आपने कैप्सूल, जो बायोडिग्रेडेबल कैप्सूल है पराली के लिए, उस पर खर्च किए हैं, किंतु एडवर्टाइजमेंट पे 15 करोड़ 84 लाख रुपए खर्च किए हैं।
Environment Minister in the Delhi government, Gopal Rai, said that it has been decided to extend Delhi government's red light on, car off campaign by another 15 days, and this will continue till 3rd December. Meanwhile, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath called for the need to go for coordinated efforts for a permanent solution to pollution in the national capital region. While air quality is no better in Mumbai, Kolaba area of Mumbai has seen air quality index at 345 for the continuous second day, and this shows AQI is very poor. Now all eyes are on the next hearing in the Supreme Court on Wednesday, and the centre can place any roadmap to stop pollution. And it is hoped that some tough and bold steps may be taken which may give some relief to the people. Bureau Report, DD India.
Newly appointed U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Thomas West visited New Delhi on 16th November. He called on the National Security Advisor and Foreign Secretary. The discussions focused on current developments in Afghanistan. They included the recently held Regional Security Dialogue of NSAs on Afghanistan in New Delhi, movement of people in and out of Afghanistan, coordinating global efforts on humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, regional security issues, and other bilateral and international issues of mutual interest. Right, in other news from the U.S. now, for instance, the U.S. President Joe Biden has signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law. Here, take a look at the next report.
My fellow Americans, today I want you to know we hear you and we see you. The bill I'm about to sign along is proof that despite the cynics, Democrats and Republicans can come together and deliver results. We can do this.
Yeah. Bravo. President Joe Biden signed his hard-fought $1 trillion infrastructure deal into law Monday before a bipartisan celebratory crowd on the White House lawn, declaring that the new infusion of cash for roads, bridges, ports and more is going to make life change for the better for the American people. The bill signing ceremony was a rare moment when members of both parties were willing to stand together and celebrate a bipartisan achievement. The U.S. president said that the bill's passage showed that despite the cynics, Democrats and Republicans can come together and deliver results. He called the bill a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America.
I ran for president believing it was time to rebuild the backbone of this nation, which I characterize as working people in the middle class. They're the ones who built the country. And to rebuild the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. This law delivers on that long overdue promise, in my view. It creates better jobs for millions of Americans.
Biden signed an executive order before the ceremony directing that materials made in the United States be given priority in infrastructure projects. Prospects, however, are tougher for further bipartisanship ahead of the 2022 midterm elections as Biden pivots back to more difficult negotiations over his broader $1.85 trillion social spending package. The president hopes to use the infrastructure law to build back his popularity, which has taken a hit amid rising inflation and the inability to fully shake the public health and economic risks from COVID-19. Bureau Report, DD India.
Right across the Atlantic in the European Union, after Tuesday's standoff at the Poland-Belarus border between thousands of stranded migrants and the Polish border forces, a video published by Polish officials on Twitter shows that the crossing point compound has been cleared on the Belarusian side. The migrants are seemingly returning to their former makeshift camp located a few hundred meters further along the borderline. More than 20,000 Polish security service members from the police, border guard or army are reinforcing the border where migrants have gathered near a crossing at the Polish town of Kuznica. An estimated 4,000 migrants are near the border, and many say Belarusian authorities are not allowing them to return to Minsk. The EU says Belarus is encouraging migrants to cross the border in revenge for sanctions over a crackdown on protests last year against President Alexander Lukashenko's contested re-election. In other news, Robert Jordan's fantasy book series The Wheel of Time comes to the small screen in a new television drama with Oscar nominee Rosamund Pike at the helm. The OTT series features the British actor as Moraine, a member of the mighty all-woman Aes Sedai organization, who embarks on a perilous journey around the world with a group of young men and women. One of them is prophesied to save or destroy humanity. Pike, known for Gone Girl and Die Another Day, leads a relatively unknown cast of young actors in a vote of confidence for the series, which has drawn comparisons with Game of Thrones. Filming for Season 2 has begun in the Czech Republic. Jordan's books have won a loyal following since the first, The Eye of the World, was published in 1990. The series is comprised of 14 volumes, with fellow fantasy writer Brandon Sanderson co-authoring the last 3 after Jordan died in 2007. The Wheel of Time hits the screens on Friday. Now, members of the union that represents about 60,000 behind-the-scenes workers in the U.S. film and television have narrowly approved a new contract with the producers. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, which includes camera operators, makeup artists, sound technicians and others, said in a statement its members voted to ratify a new 3-year contract that was tentatively agreed last month. The voting was close, with 50.3% of members voting yes and 49.7% voting against. Now, the deal with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers was reached in October after the union threatened a strike that would have to shut down film and television production around the United States in the biggest stoppage since the 2007-2008 strike by Hollywood screenwriters. It would have hit a wide range of media companies, including Netflix, Walt Disney and Comcast. Now, long before Venus and Serena Williams were old enough to even pick up a tennis racket, their father had their future all mapped out. His amazing story is the heart of the new film King Richard, opening in US movie theaters and HBO Max on Friday. While Venus and Serena Williams are now household names and icons of black female empowerment, the tale of how they reached the heights of sporting fame from a hardscrabble neighborhood in Los Angeles is barely known. Played by Will Smith, Richard Williams was coach, dad and promoter of the girls, training with them on broken-down public courts in the 90s South Los Angeles, collecting discarded balls and battling against derision and skepticism to get them attention. The movie has been made with the backing of the Williams family and features a rousing song by Beyonce. And with that, it's a wrap. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.